resources used to prevent the frauds, errors, and inefficiencies. So it is about the certain organization structure, rules, procedures, and the resources. We are discussing about internal control is nothing but internal control is a process designed to provide seasonable or about the organization structure, rules, procedures, and the resources which are placed in a big concern or a small concern, whatever it. What are the rules and regulations they are framing and they are providing? That is nothing but internal control. And what are the types of internal control? Internal control can be categorized into three types. Major categories are three types. That is preventive control, detective control, and corrective control. These are the three internal control types. First one is about preventive controls, second one is about detective control, and third one is about corrective control. So preventive control is designed to avoid the errors and irregularities. For example, let us look into authorization of the procedures and the physical safeguards and segregation of the duties. So it is about the preventive control. It's nothing but if any control is happened before the any problem or misrepresentation happen, that is control is called preventive control, which are designed to avoid the errors and irregularities, unauthorized procedures or any physical safeguards or segregation of duties. These are comes under the preventive control category. And the second one is about detective control to identify and correct the errors after they have occurred. Preventive are before they are going to occur, we are analyzing and we are identifying and we are taking a measure to control those uh, frauds or mistakes. That is preventive control. If already identified and we are making correct that errors after they have occurred is called detective control. It is nothing but reconciliations and internal audit and exception reports. We internal audits about we discussed in the previous classes. So that is comes under the detective control. And the corrective control, it is the third category of the types of control. Correct the issues discovered by the detective control. What is corrective control do? Correct the issues discovered by the detective control. Example, updation of the procedures, training, and system modification. So these are the three important types of internal control: preventive, detective, and corrective. Preventive control is designed to avoid the errors and irregularities. And the detective control is identifying the correct errors after they have occurred. And the corrective control is about correct the issues discovered by the detective control. These are the three important controls of internal control system. And also objectives of internal control. Why internal control we have to introduce in the business organization? What it will help for the what it how it will be helpful for our auditing procedure. Let us look into one by one. It is safeguard asset and reduce the risk of fraud. It is safeguard the asset and reduce the risk of fraud. How it will be uh, helpful for the asset for because if any asset is going to be purchased in the books of further in the market for the future use, it will give certain returns for the uh, concern in a long term basis. So if that long term basis it is giving any benefits, it has to be maintained and it has to be treated as a fixed asset. And they has to follow rules and regulations related to the fixed asset. If they are following rules and regulations related to the fixed asset as an internal control, auditor can do the auditing procedure with the safeguard of assets and reducing the risk of the fraud. It is helpful for the reducing the risk of the fraud. And also ensure the accurate and reliable financial report. If internal control is maintaining that, it can be trustworthy for the auditor and also for the society as well. auditor can also be ensure that accurate and reliability of the financial reporting. And even though he is the ensuring that he must do the examination of books of accounts, and also he has to give a report on the books of accounts. But somewhat he will be reliable feel about the accuracy and the financial reporting. And also, and the important objective is promote operational efficiency and the effectiveness. The internal control promotes by default operational efficiency and effectiveness, and also it ensures the compliance with the laws, regulations, and the internal policies. So we discussed about internal control, always deals about the laws, regulations, and internal policies and rules about the an organization. So it is ensuring that compliance with the laws and regularities, and also it the protect the organization's reputation and the shareholders' trust. It will protect the organization's reputation and the shareholders' trust. So these are the major objectives of internal control. And how internal control will be going to do. Okay, internal control process. The internal control is typically include uh, control environment and the risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. These are the major steps involved in the internal control process. Control environment, risk assessment, the control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. So these steps, important steps, will go with the internal control process. The internal control process typically includes control environment. It is the first step. How control environment is a process in the internal control process. It sets the uh, top and influence control conscience of the employees. How it is the environment will be controlled, how what is the nature of that environment, and which kind of business it is, and which kind of industry it is. Is it a non-profit organization or a profit motive organization? It will be useful for if we study about the environment or the nature of the business. And the second step is risk assessment, identifying and analyzing the risk that could impact the achievement of that objectives. How these objectives are the how the environment is impacting the organizational objectives. He has to identify and what are the risks involved in this risk that could be achieved by the organization, and also control activities. What are the policies and procedures established to address the identified risk? And the information and the communication system to capture the relevant information, because information and communication systems playing a crucial role in the organization process for the auditing and also books of accounting recording. So the information and communication is a major step in the internal control process. And final step is about monitoring, regular assessment of the control system's performance over the time. It has to monitor each and every report. So it is about the process of audit control system. And also scope of the internal control. What is the scope of an internal control? Financial controls, operating controls, compliance controls, and IT controls. These are the four important limits, the scope of internal control, how internal controls are going to the these four. So let us look into the financial control. How financial controls is a scope for the internal control is accuracy of financial reporting. Financial controls is nothing but accuracy of the financial reporting. If financial reporting showing an accurate figures, that is the financial control. Major objective of the financial control is accuracy of financial reporting. In the same way, operational control is about the efficiency of processes. By how business organization is operating will be measured on basis of efficiency of the process. And also we discussed about the compliance of control. It is to other to the regulatories and the laws, compliance, controls. These are the regulatories or the regulations and laws. And IT controls, information technology playing a crucial role. So the data security and the system integrity. These are the most important point in the uh, this internal control, that is data security and system integrity. Otherwise, the most important data might be released to the third party person, and they may misuse the company's secrecy and the company's information. So these are the four important controls: financial control, operating control, compliance control, and IT controls. This is about the scope of internal control and also principles of internal control. What are the principles of internal control? To establish clear responsibility and accountability. The first principle is will be establish clear responsibilities and accountability. And also, second one is about maintain proper segregation of duties, maintaining proper segregation of duties. And next point is about implement adequate documentation and record keeping, implementation of adequate documentation and record keeping, and conduct regular reviews and reconciliations, conduct regular reviews and reconciliations, and enforce physical and logical access control, enforce physical and logical access controls. These are the principles of internal control. Establish clear responsibilities and accountability, maintain proper segregation of duties, implement adequate documentation and record keeping, and the conduct regular reviews and recognitions and the reconciliations, and also the enforce physical and logical access of control. So these are the principles of internal control. And with the internal control, what is advantage? What is the benefit to the organization and the society for the firm? How it is advantages for the with the help of internal control. Let us look into one by one. Internal control reduce the risk of fraud and error. With the internal control, we can reduce the risk of fraud and errors. And the second one improves operational efficiency. We already discussed about it. It improves operational efficiency and it enhances the reliability of financial statements. With the internal control, it enhances the reliability of the financial statements, and also it increases the stakeholders' confidence. Who are the stakeholders here? The various persons who are engaged with the organization, nothing but creditors, the loan providers, or any debtors, and the shareholders and the board of directors and the general public and the investors. So these are the stakeholders. It increases the confidence about an organization and also it supports regulatory competence and corporate governance. Internal control and help the support of the regulatory compliance and corporate governance. So these are the most important advantages of internal control. And apart from that, major important advantages. Some of the limitations also there in the internal control system. What are the limitations? That is cost versus benefit constraints. Internal control is not an easy, it is expensive. It is cost benefit constraints also involved in the internal control because the internal control having some rules and regulations he has to follow and he has to maintain and then lot of cost benefits constraints are involved in the process of internal control and the human resource and oversight. Some major human resources are involved in the internal control because a system cannot do any work itself, even though if we do any program, but the manpower are required for the internal control system. So internal control system will helpful for the with the use of the human resource. are the human persons only, human beings only. So human errors and oversight also some one of the major drawback in the internal control. Some human may do errors and it is maybe an oversight because it is not a system. So that is about the one of the limitation of the internal control. And the management override of control. Sometimes management can override the controls, uh, and also the changes in technologies and business processes. Majorly, the rapid changes are coming in the technology and the business process, and the society is full of people who are advancing in the technology and they want to be a competitor in the society. So internal control also will help affecting or it is impacting by the changes, rapid changes in the technology and business process. So it is major limitation of the internal control. And what is the relationship between the internal audit and internal control? So what we internal audit, just we discuss about the internal audit. Internal audit is an independent function of that assesses the effectiveness of the internal control. It is internal audit is an independent function that assesses the effectiveness of the internal control, and also it provides assurance to the management and the board of the directors for the adequacy and functioning of the control. This is the relationship between the internal control and the internal auditor. And internal control and the role of auditor. Auditors evaluate the design of effectiveness of internal control as a part of their audit procedure. In the audit procedure also, the internal control has to be evaluated by the auditor. So he has the role of evaluator of our internal control. And also they identify the control weakness and provide a recommendation for the improvement. They has to, if any fail in the internal control, the auditor can suggest, he can give some recommendations to the what is the weakness of this internal control. They may give suggestion to the management or the shareholders. And what is the internal control has to do? It involves regular testing, assessment, and updation of the control mechanism to ensure ongoing effectiveness. So internal control also has to be regular testing and assessment of updating of the control and the mechanism to ensure ongoing effectiveness. And the internal control questionnaire, a structured set of questions used by an auditor to evaluate the effectiveness of the internal controls of an organization. A structured questionnaire has two questions. A set of questions is nothing but a questionnaire. A structured questions has to be used by the auditor to evaluate the effectiveness of the internal control in an organization. It is one of its role, and it has to cover the all the areas like financial reports and asset protection and compliance and risk management, which that questionnaire who was preparing is going to prepare must to be covers the financial reporting, asset protection, and compliance and risk management. So this is about the internal control. It is a critical component of effectiveness for governance and risk management. So we discussed about what is internal control and what are the types. Uh, and also we discussed in the objectives, what are the objectives of internal control and internal control process, which what are the steps involved in this internal control process and scope and internal scope of the internal control also we discussed, and what are the principles and also advantages and limitations, and what is the relationship with the internal audit and internal control we discussed one by one. So let us look into this process again. So internal control refers to the policies and procedures and rules and regulations which are implemented by an organization to safeguard its assets. And internal control is a process designed to provide a reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of objectives related to the operations related reporting and compliances. So it encompasses the organization structure, rules, procedures, and resources used to prevent the frauds, errors, and inefficiencies. It is helpful for the prevent the frauds, errors, and inefficiencies. And we discussed about types of internal control. Three types of internal controls are there: preventive control, detective control, and third one is about corrective control. These are the three internal controls playing a major role. And preventive control is designed to avoid the errors and irregularities. Uh, and detective control are nothing but identifying and correct the errors after they have occurred, and corrective errors are correct the issues discovered by detective controls. So it is have an interrelationship between these three is about types of internal control. And what are the objectives: safeguards of assets, and ensure accuracy and reliability of the financial reports, and promote operational efficiency and effectiveness, ensure compliance with the laws, regulations, and the internal policies about the uh, internal control, and to protect the organizational reputation and the stakeholder trust. These are the major objectives of the internal control. An internal control process involved majorly five steps, that is nothing but control environment, risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. These are the five steps involved in the internal control process. And scope of internal control, it is having four limited scopes, that is financial control and operational control, compliance control, IT control. These are the scope of the internal control. And the policies of internal control, it what are the policies and the how these policies are become the principles of the internal control. We discussed it is establish the clear responsibilities of accountability, and maintain proper segregation of duties, and implement the adequate documentation of record keeping, and conduct regular reviews and reconciliations, and ensure physical and logical access to the controls. These are the principles of internal control. And advantages: it reduces the risk and fraud, it improves the operational efficiency, it enhances the reliability and financial statement, it increases the stakeholder confidence, support the regulatory compliance and the corporate governance. And apart from these advantages, some limitations also there. It is cost versus benefit constraints, and the human errors and oversight is also there, and management override controls are also misleading, and majorly rapid changes in the technology and business processes. These are the limitations, major limitations involved in the internal control. So internal audit is an independent function, assess the effectiveness of the internal control. So it is having a relationship between the internal auditing and internal control. And auditor role regarding the internal control, he has to evaluate the design and effectiveness of internal control as a part of their audit procedure. In the audit procedure only, he has to evaluate the design and effectiveness of the internal control, and they have to identify the control weakness and provide possible recommendations for the improvement. It is one of the improvement and suggestion given by the auditor. And it has to be the internal control has to be regular testing and assessment, and keep updating on the control mechanism, and ensure ongoing effectiveness. And the internal control of the questionnaire also has to be prepared a structured set of questions used by auditors to evaluate the effectiveness, and it covers the major financial areas: financial reporting, asset protection, and compliance and risk management has to be covered. So with this, we are going to conclude, because the internal audit is a critical component of effective governance and risk management. This might become in the examination point of view also, or the long questions. So be prepared for it, and be confident in the exam. If you have it is come, you have to write. Thank you.